The lights overhead buzzed softly, too sterile and too perfect, humming with the precision of a species that had engineered boredom into architecture. The girl sat still in the transport pod, her arms folded across her chest, eyes half-lidded. No one had greeted her. That was fine. She hadn't come for handshakes. She stepped out into the academic nexus of the Varelian Galactic Institute, renowned for its diplomacy, technocratic governance, and utter lack of imagination. Everything gleamed. Everything worked. Everything watched. She wasn't tall, not by most species standards. Slender human, brown hair tied in a high tail that curled like a whip behind her. Uniform crisp, regulation issued, but already slightly scuffed at the boots. Not a mark of disrespect. Just honest wear. They noticed that. They always noticed the wrong things. No one addressed her directly at orientation. They whispered. A few dared to look. Fewer held her gaze. The words Deathworlder passed lips in dozens of dialects, most poorly veiled. The term wasn't inaccurate. Earth ranked high on the Xenoecological Danger Index. Its weather systems alone had military-grade hostility. Predators hunted with sentience. Even the bacteria killed creatively. She walked the halls without haste, absorbing layout light airflow. Her room, Section G4, had oxygen slightly off ratio, gravity 0.5% lighter than Earth norm. She compensated without conscious effort. 2 steps in, she already knew the location of vents, cameras, and blind spots, just in case. The first class was Xenopsychology and Cultural Constructs, taught by Professor Zaurath, a scholar of telepathic races, and, according to the Institute's archive, a staunch purist. A bipedal Crenari, Zaurath stood nearly 3 meters tall, skin like weatherstone and eyes like frozen sap. His voice vibrated, even when silent. She took her seat early, center of the room, front row, legs crossed on the bench, hands on her lap. Students trickled in, most choosing seats behind her. A few looked at her, as if she brought a knife to a diplomacy symposium. Zaurath entered with theatrical timing. The room cooled a few degrees. His gaze swept the class until it landed on her. He held it too long. "We are joined," he said, "by a novelty." Laughter, muted, cautious. He continued. "A species whose civilization was still hunting with metal projectiles 2 planetary cycles ago. Let us welcome the Deathworlder." Her expression didn't change. Neither did her pulse. Zaurath strode to the center dais, the floor lighting subtly adjusting to follow his movements. "Tell me, human, what is culture?" She replied evenly. "A structured interpretation of collective behavior, filtered through historical trauma and biological imperative." He tilted his head. Textbook. "Safe." "You asked a safe question." Murmurs sparked around the room. Zaurath's lipless mouth twitched. "Perhaps a better question. What separates civilization from savagery?" She blinked. Perspective. The twitch grew. Expand. She tilted her head slightly. The empires have conquered 12 systems by engineering a virus that made its victims compliant. They called it pacification. You call it strategy. They called it civilization. He stared at her, then slowly approached. Each step vibrated slightly through the floor. "And what, then, is savagery?" "Taking what isn't yours without understanding the cost." The silence thickened. Zaurath smiled, tight and small. "Would you say humans understand cost?" Her gaze sharpened. "Better than you." There it was. The weight shifted. Every student leaned slightly away from her. Zaurath stopped in front of her desk, towering. He reached forward slowly, hand like a slab of metal. The gesture was almost paternal. "Almost. Then perhaps," he murmured, "you'll explain the cost of this." His fingers wrapped around her wrist. Firm, not painful, dominant. She didn't move. She just looked at him. Her hand remained loose in his grip, fingers soft. Then, precisely, she adjusted her seated posture by an inch. Her shoulder rolled, elbow dipped. Her thumb bent inward, not her own, his. There was a sound, almost like thick fabric tearing. Then a sharper one, crack, pop, silence. Zaurath reeled back, his arm hanging at a grotesque angle. She hadn't stood up. He stared at it, stunned. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The class sat frozen, some with wide eyes, some with their mouths covered. One, a reptilian species from Keras 4, fainted straight out his chair. She exhaled softly. "That," she said, "was your cost." A thin, high alarm chimed. Emergency lights blinked in one corner. Medical drones zipped through the upper corridor tracks, descending like silver insects. Zara stepped back, stumbling slightly. One of the drones scanned him and emitted a flat tone of concern. Bone, ligament, nerve compromised. She remained seated, hands folded in her lap again. The first instructor to rush in was a short-bodied Ellerin with 8 limbs and infinite nervous energy. He stopped dead upon seeing the professor's injury, and then her. His speech stuttered. Did she do this? No one answered. Most of them were still trying to make sense of how. Zalrith said nothing. Not because he didn't want to, but because whatever words he had, she'd already stolen them with a single movement. They asked her to come with them. She did. Calmly, easily, almost politely. The walk to the disciplinary chamber was quiet, flanked by 2 armored guards who kept their distance. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't ask for anything. The tribunal chamber was curved and bright, filled with a dozen species representing academic authority. The central speaker, a tall, translucent being of the Caliph caste, tapped gently on the air, generating perfect silence. "You attacked the professor," it said. "He grabbed me," she replied. "Did you feel threatened?" I felt interrupted. "Could you not have disengaged?" "I did." There was a pause. "You broke his arm." "I also could have broken his neck." One of the tribunal members made a choking sound. The Caliph waved it down. The room shifted in tone then. Less accusation. More curiosity. She wasn't what they expected. Not anymore. They asked for her explanation. She gave it simply. No dramatics. No defensiveness. "In my world," she said, "you're taught never to touch someone without warning. Every species that survives our ecosystem long enough learns that, because if you don't, you die." One of the members leaned forward. "And this was restraint?" "Yes." They conferred in silence. She didn't interrupt. Minutes passed. "We do not find you in violation of law," the Caliph said at last, "but your presence is complicated." She nodded. "I'm used to that. You will remain under observation." "That's fine." She stood slowly, fluidly, as if the weight of the entire chamber rolled off her with motion. As she walked out, the hall outside was no longer empty. Students waited, not speaking, just watching. And as she passed them, none dared meet her eyes for more than a heartbeat. None, except one. A small creature with translucent skin and 6 fingers raised its hand in a shy wave. She gave the faintest nod in return, then kept walking. The sound of Zaratha's arm breaking hadn't faded from collective memory. It reverberated through the institute like an echo in a canyon, bouncing from mind to mind, retold with reverence, disbelief, and a tinge of fear. The footage, captured by at least 3 passive observation drones, had already spread to internal networks before the tribunal dismissed her without sanction. By the time she returned to her room, a dozen messages waited. Some curious, some accusatory. One simply said, "How?" She didn't reply to any of them. For 3 days, the campus watched her without approaching. Every hallway she walked became a corridor of held breath. Students stepped aside. Staff averted their gaze. It wasn't respect. Not yet. It was a pause before language forms around something new. Something not yet myth, not yet understood. On the 4th day, she returned to class. She entered quietly, exactly on time, and took the same seat. Center front, legs crossed, hands calm. No one followed her lead. Most sat 3 rows back. Some didn't come at all. A substitute professor, a yellowite with segmented arms and eyes that blinked sideways, began the lecture without comment. No one mentioned Zaurith. No one needed to. His absence was loud enough. She paid attention. She always did. The notes she took were spare, efficient, bordering on cryptic. She wrote not to remember, but to process. Even when answers were obvious, she listened longer than required. She waited for what wasn't said, because often That was what mattered most. After class, she was intercepted. 3 students stood near the exit, older, broad-shouldered, exuding quiet menace. A Kothari, a 4-eyed Elzen, and a Larnine with scaled skin like rippled bronze. Not posturing, not exactly, but their presence was deliberate. "You made him look weak," the Kothari said. She didn't stop walking. "He did that on his own. You embarrassed a pillar of this place." She turned slightly. "He grabbed a student in front of witnesses. Are you okay with that?" The Elzen shifted his weight. "He was teaching. You humiliated him." "I corrected him." The Larnine took a step closer. "You're making enemies." Her eyes met his. Not sharp, not cold, just aware. "I'm making standards." For a moment, the air thickened. They didn't move aside, but they didn't advance either. She paused, then walked past him without breaking stride. By the time she reached the central atrium, she had acquired a shadow, a small one, the same translucent-skinned student who'd waved at her after the tribunal. Tentative, wide-eyed, walking with careful distance but obvious intent. She stopped. "You've been following me for 33 meters, she said without turning. A soft, clicking sound came from behind. "I calculated that initiating interaction before the main hall would be perceived as too eager." She turned slowly. The creature was less than half her height, arms longer than its legs, with bioluminescent patches that pulsed faintly blue. "What's your name?" she asked. "I'm designated Kayar. From Elvita." "Why are you following me, Kayar?" "I wanted to ask if you'd teach me." She blinked once. "Teach you what?" Kayar's voice dropped into a lower register, more serious, more uncertain. "How to not be afraid." She studied him. No tremble in his frame, no deceit in his tone. Just a strange, raw honesty of someone who had grown tired of flinching. "I don't teach," she said. "I'd learn anyway." That made her smile, barely. "Walk with me?" They did. Not as equals, not yet, but as something closer than strangers. Later that day, she was summoned. Not to the tribunal, not to class, to the administrative quadrant. A silent corridor where conversations rarely ended in clarity. They brought her into a chamber with tiered seating and a single central podium. It felt like a courtroom, but colder. Zalra sat at the far end, arm braced in a metallic sheath, his expression unreadable. Beside him stood a delegate of the Academic Conduct Council. Tall, narrow, silver-plated skin, genderless voice. "We have reviewed the footage. It began—" "I know," she said. Zalra didn't speak. He didn't need to. "We are not here to revisit the tribunal's ruling," the delegate continued. "However, concerns have been raised about influence, about precedent. You're afraid others will do what I did, or attempt to." She shrugged. "Teach them not to." The delegate tilted its head, processing. "We would prefer this event not become emblematic. That's not up to me." The silence was long. Zalra finally spoke. His voice was lower than before, scraped raw by something older than pride. "You think you won." "No," she replied. "I think you lost." He looked at her then, not with hate, not even anger, with something closer to calculation, reassessment, not of her strength, but of her meaning. "Would you do it again?" he asked. "If the circumstances repeated," she said. "Yes." Even knowing it would shape everything after? Her gaze didn't waver, especially then. Afterward, no reprimand came, no punishment, but a message circulated, quietly authorized by the administration. It advised all faculty to avoid direct physical contact with students during instruction. It was worded carefully. No names were used, but everyone knew. 3 days later, the confrontation happened. Not in class. Not in a tribunal. In the lower arboretum, where students wanted to escape the artificial sterility of the upper halls. Trees, real ones, grew along the outer walls, roots anchored in reinforced soil beds. Light filtered down in golden shafts, simulating dawn. She was there, cross-legged again, teaching Kayar how to breathe under duress. "You're thinking too much," she said. "I'm thinking about not thinking." Kaiar muttered. She reached over, touched his shoulder lightly. There. That. You tensed. What were you expecting? Pain, he said too quickly. Then you're already losing. Footsteps interrupted them. Intentional. Loud enough to draw attention. The three from before. Kothari, Elzin, Larnine. This time they weren't content to threaten. We gave you a warning, the Larnine said. She stood. Kaiar scrambled back, half-crouched. The Kothari cracked his knuckles. Let's see how strong you are without an audience. She didn't move. You're about to learn a lesson I didn't intend to teach. The Elzin stepped forward, eyes narrowing. We'll see how calm you are on your back. She exhaled, slow and long. Then she dropped into stance, not wide, not dramatic, just ready. The Kothari charged first. Big mistake. She sidestepped, caught his arm, and redirected it into a nearby tree trunk with sickening thud. He dropped. The Elzin hesitated. She didn't. 2 steps and he was off balance, his legs swept. She didn't even look at him as he fell. The Larnine bared teeth. You're not better than us. She moved closer, fast. I don't need to be, she said. I just need to be enough. He threw a punch. She ducked, planted a hand on his shoulder, and brought her knee up, controlled, precise. He folded. It lasted 12 seconds. She didn't gloat, didn't speak. Kaiar stared, mouth open. She looked back at him. See? No fear. He nodded slowly. How did you know they'd come for you? I didn't, but I knew they wouldn't know how to lose. Word spread faster this time. Not just about what she did, but how she did it. Measured, decisive, without escalation, without cruelty. By the time the next class convened, no one sat behind her. They sat beside her. And for the first time, she wasn't alone in the front row. She awoke to silence. Not the comfortable hush of early morning, but a calculated, sterile void. The kind that felt manufactured, artificially calm. In the Institute, silence was rarely passive. It was often a prelude. She sat up in bed, muscles coiled before her mind had fully cleared. Something felt displaced. Not wrong, exactly, but observed. Watched not by eyes, but by protocols. Systems built to track aberrations in behavior, in compliance. The door chimed before she could fully dress. Not urgent, not a knock. A chime, soft and sterile, like a polite surveillance system, announcing its next step. She opened the door. 2 figures stood there. One was Administrator Vilek, a humanoid with a transparent dermal shell that revealed the shifting play of muscles and inner tissue beneath. The other was someone she hadn't seen before. Shorter, lean, unassuming in feature but not in presence. A kind of stillness clung to them like armor. Ms. Wren. Vilek began with rehearsed courtesy. This is Enforcer Liaison Tarn. We need a moment. She stepped aside. They entered without further invitation, hands folded, expressions practiced. Tarn spoke first. You become an instability vector. That's vague, she replied. Deliberately so. The Council isn't prepared to label you a threat, yet your influence exceeds tolerances. Vilek nodded. Students are mimicking your posture in training halls. Classes have begun to reference human assertiveness as a new doctrinal variable. You mean they're paying attention? We mean, Tarn interjected, they're shifting the institutional hierarchy. You disrupted equilibrium. She crossed her arms. Equilibrium that involved silence when someone broke a student's wrist? Tarn didn't flinch. Zalrith was disciplined. Quietly, but the point is broader. You've made yourself a nexus. And the Institute doesn't allow independent nexuses. For a moment, she considered feigning innocence, but it felt useless here. These weren't the kind of officials you misdirect. These were the ones who'd been warned about her. What happens now? She asked. Tarn's expression didn't shift. We test you. Academically, existentially. They handed her a sealed datapad. Inside, a single message awaited, a location within the Institute's lowest levels, unused, restricted, old, beneath the training domes, past the archives, into territory where light stopped behaving correctly. They left without waiting for acknowledgement. She stared at the message for a long time after the door closed. By the time she arrived at the coordinates, the silence had deepened into something oppressive. Not heavy, not loud, but aware. The corridor was narrow, the walls lined with faded instructional murals from decades past. Forgotten philosophies, obsolete ideologies. At the end of the hall was a circular chamber. Inside, one figure waited. Zalrith. His arm was healed. Not braced, not protected. But something had shifted in him. Something brittle had calcified into precision. "I asked for this," he said without preamble. She didn't pretend surprise. "They sent me." "I know." He took a step forward, movement slower than before. Not cautious, measured. This place is where we once trained combat tacticians, before simulation became safer. She circled slightly, assessing the room's angles, exits. "You want a rematch?" "No, I want an understanding." She narrowed her eyes. That's a dangerous word. Zalrith exhaled. It sounded almost like a laugh. "You're not the only one who lost something when that tribunal convened. I taught here for 80 years. But the moment my arm broke, the Institute broke me with it." She said nothing. "I wasn't angry that you bested me," he continued. "I was angry that I didn't see it coming, that I underestimated you." She finally spoke. "And now I see what the Institute fears. Not your strength, your refusal to defer." He moved to the center of the chamber, where an activation node awaited. He placed a hand on it. Panels slid open around the room. Drone spheres emerged, old training constructs, scorched and worn, but still functional. "I want to see it," he said. "Unfiltered. What you are, not in rebellion, not in self-defense, but in motion." She stepped forward. "You think I'm some weapon to test?" "I think you're something no one here has classified yet, and I want to be the first who tries to understand you without fear." The drones activated. They moved fast, erratic, complex, armed with kinetic stunners and pattern recognition AI, designed to overwhelm reflexes, to break posture, to expose hesitation. She moved faster. It wasn't like her previous fights. Those had been efficient, practical. This was something else. She adapted before they completed their second pass. Shifted weight mid-strike, redirected impact points, used walls and inertia and prediction. She moved like water through heat. Every strike she landed felt like punctuation. Sharp, final, inevitable. Zalrith watched, not just with his eyes, with his stance, with every breath held as if absorbing more than motion. He was learning something, not just about her style, about her nature. When the last drone fell, sparking and twitching, she turned to him. He bowed. It wasn't theatrical. It was honest. Recognition without surrender. She didn't bow back, but she didn't walk away either. "You're not what I feared," he said, voice quiet. "Neither are you," she replied. Then they both smiled, small, tired smiles forged from the weight of changed minds. As she left the chamber, datapad tucked under her arm, she found Guy R. waiting at the corridor's mouth. "Was it true," he asked, "what they said about a test?" She nodded. "And they're not testing to eliminate me anymore," she said. KIR blinked. "Then what?" "They're testing to see if I belong." He walked beside her in silence. At the end of the hall, a small crowd had gathered. Not large, maybe a dozen students. None looked hostile. All looked uncertain. She paused. "You're not invisible anymore," KIR said. She shook her head. "I never was." One student stepped forward. A Sarati, soft-spined and wide-eyed. "Will you lead us?" She looked at them, not as a fighter, not even as a rebel, as a choice. "No," she said, "but I'll stand beside you when you lead yourselves." And with that, she walked on, forward, not alone. The Institute's architecture was designed to inspire reverence. Sweeping atriums, vaulted corridors, layered lighting calibrated to emphasize silence over warmth. It wasn't built to welcome change. It was built to preserve power. Ren's presence had already disrupted that. The changes were subtle at first. Students no longer whispered when passing her. They didn't part like waves around her anymore. They gathered, some with questions, others with curiosity, a few with cautious hope. But something deeper had shifted. People began walking differently, standing taller, not because they imitated her movements, but because her defiance had made space for their own. Her singular act of refusal had rippled out like gravitational force, bending the expected trajectories of others. Still, it wasn't peace. It was potential. And potential threatened those who profited from stillness. The Administrative Council convened under false pretenses, issuing what they called a reform conclave. Officially, it was a forum for student-faculty dialogue, a gesture toward inclusion. Unofficially, it was a trap, a stage set for containment under the guise of recognition. Ren knew that before the invitation even reached her. She accepted anyway. The conclave chamber was hemispherical, lined with faculty representatives and select students chosen not for insight, but for compliance. Tarn stood near the dais. Zaurith, notably, did not. Ren entered without fanfare. Alone, KIR watched from the crowd. Others, those who now walked taller, clustered behind him, uncertain if this was triumph or trial. The head facilitator began the proceedings with practiced diplomacy. Ren of Earth, you become a symbol of assertive adaptation. We seek understanding, collaboration. Ren didn't sit. You seek control. A murmur. Tarn's head tilted slightly. The facilitator smiled. Control is a loaded word. We prefer cohesion. You mean obedience. There are standards. There were standards, she interrupted. You're afraid those standards no longer hold. Tarn finally stepped forward. The Institute cannot afford instability. Instability isn't caused by strength, she said, calm but clear. It's caused by injustice. And who decides what injustice looks like? She met Tarn's gaze. Those who survive it. Silence. Then movement. From the corner of the chamber, a student stood, not one of hers, not one she'd trained. A Savonian, tall, thin, always quiet. She's not wrong. Gasps rippled. Another voice. A Larnine, then a third. Ren didn't flinch. She hadn't asked for their voices, but now they rose anyway. Tarn looked to the facilitator. Whispers passed. A shift in posture. The trap wasn't working as designed. Then the pivot came. If you refuse to integrate, the facilitator said smoothly, you force us to reassess your place here. Ren stepped forward. Then do it. Strip away the illusion. Decide whether you're an institution of knowledge or a fortress of fear. Tarn stiffened. This isn't a trial. No, she said, but it's looking more like one with every word you speak. More students stood. Dozens now. Even those who had feared her strength now stood behind it, seeing it as a shield instead of a threat. And that's when the lights dimmed, not as accident, but as signal. Doors sealed. The chamber's air pressure shifted. Defense systems engaged. Every student inside flinched, but Ren held still. Tarn's voice dropped. You were warned. She tilted her head. You just told everyone what you are. In the ceiling, armored plates retracted. Drones, newer ones, descended, not for training, for suppression. But before they could deploy, a new signal cut across the command channel. A priority override. One that not even Tarn could counter. The drones paused. Zaurith entered from the side corridor, his presence sudden, deliberate. He didn't wear the badge of the council. He wore the deep crimson of field authority, an archaic designation once used for independent judgment. I invoked Code 17, he said flatly. Tarn recoiled. That code hasn't been enacted in a century. Zaurith's expression didn't change. Exactly. Ren's eyes narrowed, but not in suspicion, in calculation. Why? Zaurith addressed the room. Because I believe the Institute has forgotten its own teachings. We were founded to house the exceptional, not to suppress them. Tarn's voice sharpened. She undermines structure. She redefines it. Zaurith said. The chamber shifted. Energy shifted. For the first time, the council had no script to follow. And Ren stepped into the vacuum. I didn't come here to lead, she said. But if the only way to protect people is to do so, then I'll stand where you refuse to. KIR stepped forward, and we'll stand with her. Voices joined, not shouted, not militant, declared. The drone slowly retracted, doors unlocked. The conclave did not end with a ruling. It ended with a silence that no longer belonged to power. Afterward, the Institute changed. Slowly, unevenly, not cleanly. There were still challenges, still resentment. Some left, some resisted. But a new protocol emerged, not codified in law, but in behavior. Students began to test boundaries not out of rebellion, but understanding. Faculty retrained. Dialogues opened. And Ren, she didn't take a title. She taught. Occasionally, when asked, she trained. Selectively, to those who understood responsibility was not dominance. She still walked alone sometimes, but never unnoticed. KIR stayed by her side longer than most. You started a movement, he said once. She shook her head. No, I just made the first sound. But it echoed. She smiled. Let it. And when new arrivals asked who she was, the answer never came from her. It came from those who had once been silent, and now were not.